Eric Swalwell throws his hat in the ring for the disarmament primary. Candace Owens thoroughly eviscerates the leftists in Congress. And President Trump tries to give the leftists exactly what they want, and they still are not satisfied. We'll examine these and a few other topics if time permits. I'm Big E, and this is the Liberty Cast. So old Eric Swalwell, another mental giant, has jumped into the mix and declared his candidacy for president. Now, there are only a few politicians of whom I have such a visceral dislike, especially on a personal level like this. I mean, Adam Schiff, he's a moron. Jerry Nadler, Ted Lieu, Maxine Waters, they're all buffoons and idiots. Pick a leftist and I can't stand their policies. That's a given. I think they're stupid. But very few I wouldn't pee on if they were on fire. Obama's one. Fake Vietnam vet and valor thief Tricky Dick Blumenthal from Connecticut, he's another one. But Swalwell takes it to another level. He irritates me beyond belief. He comes off on his TV hits as smarmy, slimy, completely disingenuous. Not to mention the fact that he literally threatened to use nukes on citizens who would rather fight than give up their guns. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I'll circle back to his nuke threat in a minute. But he's making gun confiscation a central tenet in his campaign. He's not for common sense gun safety measures. Don't be fooled by that. To the extent that such a thing actually exists, and I do not buy into that premise whatsoever. And the moment you do buy into that false premise, you lose the advantage in the debate. What he's advocating for goes well beyond gun control. He wants the government and his bodyguards to have all the guns. In fact, in an op-ed he wrote last year in USA Today, he wrote, and I'm quoting now, "We should ban possession of military-style semi-automatic weapons. We should buy back such weapons from all who choose to abide by the law, and we should criminally prosecute any who choose to defy it by keeping their weapons." Now, he tried to walk that back on an appearance on Tucker Carlson's show and said that if you wanted to keep them at a rifle club or a shooting range, that would be fine. But then Tucker pointed out the hypocrisy in that stance. Listen to this.
I'm not calling for a confiscation. What I'm saying is we should invest in a buyback, that we should restrict any weapons that aren't bought back to gun clubs, hunting clubs, shooting ranges, keep them there where it's safe and not on our streets. And if you were caught, just like if you were caught, with drugs or anything else, if they had probable cause to go into your home and you had one of these weapons, yeah, you'd be prosecuted.
I'm merely saying that you have better protection than I do. And you're saying that my family doesn't deserve to have a certain species of weapon. You get to decide what we can protect ourselves with, but you're not going to in any way take the ability to protect you away from the Capitol Hill Police.
I'm saying that every police officer in America today is outgunned. For their safety and for the safety of the people they protect, we shouldn't have assault weapons.
Right. You just don't want to apply the rules to yourself. I get it. I wouldn't either. You know what I mean? I care about protecting my family.
Well, let's protect the kids first. That seems like the first place to start.
My house. I agree.
Yeah.
Now, that was two separate sound bites from the same interview, where not only did he prove himself to be a world-class hypocrite, but he lied, because he didn't say anything about keeping these guns at a rifle or a gun club in the piece he wrote. Somebody got in his ear, and he decided that he needed to soften that a little bit. But when Tucker points out the hypocrisy of that, he tries to pivot unsuccessfully, but he tries to pivot to the police and how they're outgunned. But they're not outgunned by law-abiding citizens. They're outgunned by the criminals. And doing this would not only have the police be outgunned, but law-abiding citizens as well. It makes no sense. Of course, nothing this guy says ever makes any sense. Speaking of not making any sense, I mentioned earlier how he threatened to use nukes on citizens. Someone who I follow on Twitter by the name of Joe Biggs said that basically Swalwell wants a war. And he went on with some colorful language to say that he wouldn't give the government all the power. To which Swalwell responded, and I'm quoting, "And it would be a short war, my friend. The government has nukes." Seriously? And guess what? That tweet is still up. No one got in his ear and told him that he might need to take it down. Now, he did try to soften it up with the final sentence where he says, "I'm sure if we talked, we could find common ground to protect our families and communities." Please. He's still endorsing the idea that the government would not just go to war with citizens in order to take our guns, but that they would employ nukes in that war. So no, we can't find common ground. You want to make new laws to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. Meanwhile, the laws that are already on the books are not effectively enforced. There's not one mass shooting that would have been prevented with universal background checks. But, and I say this every time the subject comes up, if someone in the law enforcement or medical community had done their jobs properly, i.e. Scott Israel in Broward County, or any number of medical or law enforcement professionals in Arizona prior to the shooting of Gabby Giffords, that might have prevented those tragedies. But yet here, Swalwell is on one hand asking for common ground and then reaching for your guns with the other under threat of war if we don't comply. There's a word, tyranny. The Second Amendment was put in place to guard against a tyrannical government. The anti-constitutional gun control advocates scoff at the idea that the government is or even has the potential to be tyrannical. Yet when the government proposes to take them, that seems tyrannical, doesn't it? And owners promise to resist. They threaten to go to war and use the most powerful weapon in our arsenal if we don't comply. That's the very definition of tyrannical. And perhaps the most hypocritical gun control argument I've ever heard. Obviously, the government isn't going to drop a nuke on us. But he used reductio ad absurdum to make the legitimate point that the government does indeed have the power to crush any resistance. There's a saying, and I'm not sure of the exact verbiage, but it's along the lines of something like, a government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take away everything that you have. So make no mistake, the government does have the means to do this. But would they be able to wield that power to its fullest extent? I don't know, but it's a discussion worth exploring. I mean, would the local police, sheriffs, military all be fully on board with engaging with citizens over gun confiscation? Or would they side with the people? I don't know. I'm leaning towards the fact that they would side, a significant portion of those entities would side with the people. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to hear what you all have to say about it. Okay, let's move on to something a little more interesting. What I want to do is I want to compare and contrast two people that are in the public eye right now, and they are Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Candace Owens. Both of these women are 29 years old, but the differences between the two are striking. AOC, she is a vapid, immature child who somehow won a congressional seat. Now, she won because less than 20% of the population in her district voted. I suspect that number will increase in 2020, given her unfavorables as of late. But the popular line among conservatives is that only 15% voted in that election. But that takes the entire population into account. If you just look at those of voting age, it goes up to 19%. I know that's not a huge swing, but I do want to be precise in this analysis. And the left will pounce on any factual inaccuracies. But if you've read the Green New Deal, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I've talked about before how it reads like a high school science project where The student started with a premise and then just threw some words that sounded good together on a few pages and turned it in. But along with that immaturity comes a sense that she doesn't really know who she is. Now, I'm going to play a couple of clips for you, and then we'll talk about them.
This is what organizing looks like. Right. This is what building power looks like. This is what changing the country looks like. It's when we choose to show up and occupy the room and talk about the things that matter most, talking about our future. You know, Reverend, you bring up a funny anecdote, and I'm proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working retail, folding clothes for other people to buy. There is nothing wrong with preparing the food that your neighbors will eat. There is nothing wrong with driving the buses that take your family to work. There is nothing wrong with being a working person in the United States of America, and there is everything dignified about it.
Okay, that clip was kind of long, and I didn't want to destroy your eardrums with another long clip, because this one is kind of long as well. But take a listen to this one now too.
I'm at least trying, and they're not. So the power is in the person who's trying, regardless of the success. If you're trying, you've got all the power. You're driving the agenda. You're doing all this stuff. Like, I just introduced Green New Deal 2 weeks ago, and it's creating all of this conversation. Why? Because no one else has even tried. Because no one else has even tried. So people are like, oh, it's unrealistic. Oh, it's vague. Oh, it doesn't address this little minute thing. And I'm like, you try. You do it.
Right.
Because you're not. Because you're not. So until you do it, I'm the boss. How about that?
Now, I don't want to get into the plethora of gibberish that came out of her face in those two clips, but did you catch the difference in the way she spoke? Now, in the first clip, she was speaking to a group of black folks at Al Sharpton's National Action Network event. And in the second one, she was speaking to a group of people at the New York Hall of Science. She has denied using a fake accent at Al Sharpton's event, saying that she's from the Bronx. She's not. But she's from the Bronx and she acts and talks like it. Now, the proof is out there that she's not from the Bronx. She grew up in Westchester, which is a fairly affluent neighborhood. But if you need any more proof that she's not from the Bronx, just listen to that accent and tell me if you know anyone actually from the Bronx who speaks that way. But then she goes on to Twitter and defends the use of a fake accent by saying that she was code switching. So which is it? Did you not put on a fake accent and that's how you speak all the time because you're from the Bronx? Or were you code switching? It can't be both. Now, I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of what she said this time, but I point that out to illustrate just how immature she is. Not that I think that any level of maturity would cure that, because Hillary's famous for doing it too. Robert Francis O'Rourke said that the voters need to mold him into the candidate that they want him to be, which is bizarre. But this is par for the course for liberals. They have no core beliefs. The left is all about doing what is politically expedient. This is in stark contrast to conservatives. Conservatives, not Republicans, but conservatives, have a set of core beliefs. And for the most part, they don't change. Of course, conservatives can evolve with new information. But all in all, those beliefs form the bedrock from which we operate. Abortion is murder. People should keep what they earn. The government should be as small as it can be and still provide for the common defense of the nation, etc. And because we have these beliefs, there's no need to pander to the crowd or implore the electorate to tell us what to believe and what stances we should take and policies we should endorse. And that brings us to the 29-year-old firebrand Candace Owens. Her star has risen over the past few years as someone who tells it like it is. She gets fired up and she lets it rip when she's confronting leftists. It's glorious, especially when they step to her wrong. She can debate and be cordial when her opponent is, but I mean, how often are the American communists cordial when being owned by a conservative? We'll get to that in a second, but first we're going to take a quick break. So this past week, Candace Owens was called to testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee at a hearing on the subject of white nationalism and hate crimes. But as you all no doubt heard, Ted Lieu stepped to her and tried to discredit her by playing a snippet of some comment she made about Hitler. I'm going to play this clip for you, and it's a bit long, but I think we have to play the whole thing so you get the full understanding.
I don't know Miss Owens. I'm not going to characterize her. I'm going to let her own words do the talking.
I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist. But if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. Problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German.
Miss Owens, I'm sorry. We just started recording. Would you like time to respond to that?
Yes, I think it's pretty apparent that Mr. Lieu believes that black people are stupid and will not pursue the full clip in its entirety. He purposely presented an extracted clip.
The witness will suspend for a moment. It is not proper to refer disparagingly or to a member of the committee. The witness will not do that again. Witness may continue.
Sure, even though I was called despicable.
Witness may not refer to a member of the committee as stupid.
I didn't refer to him as stupid. That's not what I said. That's not what I said at all. You didn't listen to what I said. May I continue?
Please.
As I said, he is assuming that black people will not go pursue the full 2-hour clip. And he purposefully he cut off, and you didn't hear the question that was asked of me. He's trying to present as if I was launching a defense of Hitler in Germany, when in fact, the question that was asked of me was pertaining to whether or not I believed that whether or not I believed in nationalism, and that nationalism was bad. And what I responded to was that I do not believe that we should be characterizing Hitler as a nationalist. He was a homicidal, psychopathic maniac that killed his own people. A nationalist would not kill their own people. That is exactly what I was referring to in the clip, and he purposely wanted to give you a cut-up similar to what they do to Donald Trump to create a different narrative. That was unbelievably dishonest, and he did not allow me to respond to it, which is worrisome and should tell you a lot about where people are today in terms of trying to drum up narratives.
That was brilliant. That was a minute or so longer than I generally like to play, but I felt it was necessary to get, like I said before, the full understanding. And it was edited a little bit. I don't believe that it took away from the message. I'm going to link, like I said, to the full video so that you can see and judge for yourself whether or not the edits that we did make change the context at all. I don't believe that they did, but feel free to make your own judgment on that. One of the best parts of that video is how Lieu and Nadler react. The reactions of Lieu and Nadler, who was the chair of the committee and whose voice you heard telling Candace Owens that she may not refer to Lieu as stupid. He is. But their reactions are priceless. Lieu was sitting there with his fingertips together with this vacant look on his face. I'm not familiar enough with him to be able to tell whether or not that's just his face, but it could very well be. And then Nadler, when she tells him that that's not what she said, and there's a muffled voice that you can't really make out, but I'm guessing someone actually told him that she didn't refer to him as stupid. And he just shrugs. No apology, No clarification. He just shrugs. Another intellectual giant, if there ever was one. Now, the clip that Lou played was not Candace Owens' finest moment. She could have crafted that answer to the question a little better, but she was trying to draw a distinction between nationalism and globalism, or nationalism and expansionism, or maybe even more precisely, imperialism. But as usual, the left likes to redefine terms to fit their narrative. But when you look at the definition of nationalism, there's nothing wrong with it. And in that clip, she said she had no problems with it. But what the left is doing is they are co-opting the term to give it a racist connotation. They're purposefully conflating nationalism and white nationalism. And nationalism, simply put, is the idea that you're advocating for the best interests of your own country. White nationalists, on the other hand, advocate for a white ethnic state to the exclusion of anyone who is not white. But they lose all credibility when they try to portray a black woman as being a Nazi apologist, or a Jewish person like Stephen Miller or Ben Shapiro as a white nationalist or a Nazi. And both have been called both. I went through all of that to compare and contrast these two 29-year-old women and how they perfectly illustrate the differences between conservatives and the leftist American communists. It's really quite remarkable. One is a weather vane who changes her speech patterns and presentation to fit the crowd, and the other is who she is, no matter what. Even in their mistakes, they're completely different. One of them dismisses their gaffes because she's morally right, and the other defends herself and shows you that what she said, no matter how inartfully she may have expressed the point, it's still valid and completely defensible. It's going to be fascinating to watch the career trajectories of these two women. And I can't wait. I would absolutely love to see these two debate each other. It would be hysterical. Okay, let's move on. There's a couple of other things I want to touch on before we get you out of here. This week, the Trump administration floated the idea of putting illegal immigrants on buses and sending them to sanctuary cities. I think this is an absolutely splendid idea. Leaders in sanctuary cities have long been on the record as being welcoming to everyone.
It is a continued perpetuation of a racist lie that immigrants are not valued members of our society. We in Oakland know better. We in Oakland have a community that welcomes and honors all people, no matter where they came from or how they got here.
But now that the administration is looking at giving them what they want, it's cruel and vindictive. I'm not really sure how that works, but whatever.
CNN has confirmed a report in the Washington Post that the Trump administration pressured the Department of Homeland Security to release immigrants detained at the border into so-called sanctuary cities, in part to retaliate against Democrats who oppose Trump's plans for a border wall. Give me your reaction to that, Secretary.
That the cruelty of this administration never seems to end. You know, a year ago, this administration told us that as Americans, if we would just be cruel enough to separate little children from their parents, that would deter more families from coming to our southern border. And in fact, the opposite has happened. And so it's amazing what lengths they're going to. Now they're talking about, you know, busing families to particular cities to target political opponents. You know, these folks want us to choose cruelty as a weapon against these people and against political opponents. And last week I released an immigration plan. I'm calling on Americans to choose compassion, not cruelty.
They just can't seem to help themselves, can they? It's like lying is their first language. He's trying to make it seem as though the reason why we're seeing the increases in family units at the border, quote unquote family units at the border, is because of President Trump's policy of separating children from their parents at the border. That's not the case. The reason why we're seeing this increase is because the left, the policies for which he is advocating, and that was Julian Castro, in case you didn't recognize his voice, the policies for which he is advocating make it possible for them to show up at the border with a child and then get released into the interior of the country, never to be seen again. So what is he talking about? How exactly is it cruel to send people to sanctuary cities that these people say they want? These jurisdictions pass laws setting themselves up as sanctuary cities, counties, and states to attract illegal aliens, right? So now if Trump is going to grant them their wish, they're against it. I think this further illustrates a point I made earlier about the left and how they have no foundational principles. Because if they did, there would be no pushback on this. They would be telling the administration to fire up the buses and send them on. The fact that they're pushing back, though, tells me that they know that the sanctuary city policies are wrong. They just needed to be on the opposite side of the issue from the president. And now that there's a possibility that he could give them something, they have to pivot. Even though to the left, this has to be the best of all possible worlds, doesn't it? I mean, if this were to go into effect, families would be processed, put on a bus, and sent to San Francisco or Chicago or Boston or Denver or Hall County, Nebraska, or any number of cities, states, and counties. I mean, the left's hypocrisy really knows no bounds. All right, last topic before we get you out of here. Is Trump derangement syndrome a real thing? It's actually being debated among mental health professionals as to whether or not it is a real illness that can be diagnosed. Obviously, I'm not a psychologist, nor do I play one on TV, but I will play one now on this podcast and say, yes, it is a real thing. Joy Behar kind of admitted to it earlier this year. Now check out some highlights of leftists letting their Trump derangement syndrome flag fly.
This was nothing short of treasonous because it is a betrayal of the nation. He is giving aid and comfort to the enemy.
I think Donald Trump is a fascist. I think everything he stands for is disgusting.
That is pure racism. And the president is cynically using that racism to appeal to his base.
That is not what you see in a democracy. That is exactly what you see in authoritarian regimes.
They dare me to say impeach him. Today I say impeach 45. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
And Chelsea Handler recently told us on Bill Maher's show that she actually sought therapy for hers.
Yeah, I had a midlife identity crisis once Trump won the election because I had never had my world feel so unhinged, I think. And I had to pay a psychiatrist to listen to me about Donald Trump for about the first 3 weeks. And then once we got past that and we got to the real stuff, I realized the parallel there was my world becoming unhinged when I was a little girl. My brother died when I was 9 years old. I had never related the two, but for me, as I can imagine it must have been for so many people, it was a huge emotional trigger of everything being destabilized. And I realized just how spoiled and privileged I'd been all my life to realize to be this upset and this at a 10 every day and the outrage and the anger. I just wanted to fight people, you know? And I was like, I gotta go see a psychiatrist.
I hate to admit this, but I actually used to be a fan of hers years ago. Probably, actually, when she had her first show, maybe 15 or 20 years ago now. But I think it was after Obama got elected that it became apparent that that she was a hardcore leftist, which is fine. I mean, most Hollywood types are. But her politics began to bleed into her comedy, and she just stopped being funny. And now if you listen to that whole clip, she's a pothead and a self-proclaimed activist of some kind, whatever. But here's the thing about Trump derangement syndrome. There's always been a kind of psychosis with the left and their attitudes towards conservatives. And it's not going to end when Trump leaves office, whether that's in 2020, I certainly hope it's not, or 2024. The vitriol that they spew toward Trump and Pence, and I actually wanted to talk about that today too, but that's going to have to wait until next week. But the hateful rhetoric thrown their way is here to stay, regardless of whatever conservative Republican is on the scene. Because with people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, with those people gaining power and legitimacy on the national stage, I think the fill-in-the-blank derangement syndrome is here to stay. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, because it's always been here. All right, folks, that's our show for today. It actually went pretty quick. But if you like what you heard, please check us out on iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, or iHeartRadio. Like us there, leave a review, let us know what you think. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's at The Liberty Cast on all 3 platforms. I look forward to hearing from you. But until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.